The Silent Language of Figure Drawing. Episode 1: Gesture as Emotional Language. When most people look at the human body, they see form. They see shape. They see structure. They see a figure standing, sitting, or moving through space. But artists see something else first. They see gesture, not as position, not as anatomy, but as emotion made visible. Gesture is the first language of the body, and it is a language without words. Hashtag the body speaks before the mind intervenes. Before a person speaks, the body has already communicated. A slight lean forward, a relaxed shoulder, a tightened hand, a hesitant step. These are not random movements. They are expressions of inner state. The body reveals what the mind has not yet said. This is why artists begin with gesture, because gesture tells the truth faster than detail, faster than expression, faster than words. Hashtag gesture is not what the body is, it is what the body is doing. Many beginners misunderstand gesture. They think it is about drawing a figure quickly, but gesture is not speed. Gesture is direction. It is flow. It is energy moving through the body. A standing figure is not simply standing. It is balancing. A seated figure is not simply sitting. It is resting, compressing, or releasing energy. A walking figure is not static. It is transitioning through space. Gesture captures this invisible movement. Hashtag emotion lives inside movement. Every gesture carries emotional meaning. A forward lean may suggest curiosity. A backward lean may suggest hesitation. A closed posture may suggest protection. An open posture may suggest confidence. But these are not fixed rules. They are tendencies. What matters is not the label. What matters is the feeling of the movement. Artists learn to sense this feeling instinctively. Hashtag the gesture line, seeing the body as one flow. Experienced artists often reduce the body into a single flowing line, not to simplify reality, but to understand it. This line connects. Asterisk head, asterisk spine, asterisk pelvis, asterisk legs. It is not a physical line. It is a visual representation of energy. When this line feels alive, the figure feels alive. When it feels stiff, the drawing feels dead. Hashtag why gesture matters more than detail. Detail comes later. Gesture comes first. Why? Because detail without gesture has no life. A perfect hand means nothing if the body feels wrong. A perfect face cannot save a stiff pose. But a strong gesture can carry even a simple drawing. Because life is not in detail. Life is in movement. Hashtag gesture is universal. One of the most powerful things about gesture is that it is understood across cultures. No translation is needed. A slumped body feels tired. A stretched body feels alert. A curled posture feels inward. A wide posture feels expressive. The body communicates directly to human perception, and within movement, there is meaning. Artists do not invent this language. They observe it. They listen to it. They translate it into form. And once you learn to see gesture, you can never unsee it. Every person becomes a story in motion. Every body becomes a sentence without words. And every gesture becomes emotion made visible. This is where the silent language begins. The Silent Language of Figure Drawing. Episode 2: Rhythm and Flow in Human Form. When artists begin to see the human body deeply, something subtle starts to change. They stop seeing separate parts. They stop seeing isolated forms. They stop thinking in terms of head, arms, legs, or torso as individual pieces. Instead, they begin to see flow. They begin to see rhythm. Not music and sound, but music and shape. Music and movement. Music and space. Hashtag the human body has its own music. Every body carries rhythm, even in stillness, even in silence, even when a person is standing completely motionless. There's an internal structure of movement that never stops. Breathing creates rhythm. Weight shifts create rhythm. Muscle tension creates rhythm. Posture creates rhythm. The body is never truly static. It is always in a state of subtle flow. Artists learn to recognize this invisible music. Hashtag rhythm is not repetition. It is movement quality. Many people misunderstand rhythm in art. They think it means repetition. But rhythm is not repetition. Rhythm is flow. It is the way energy travels through the body. A single curve can contain rhythm. A change in direction can contain rhythm. A sequence of angles can create rhythm. What matters is not copying patterns. What matters is feeling movement. Hashtag flow connects everything in the figure. In figure drawing, nothing exists alone. Every part connects to another. The head connects to the spine. The spine connects to the pelvis. The pelvis connects to the legs. The shoulders connect to the arms. Flow is what links all of these parts into one system. Without flow, the figure feels broken. With flow, the figure feels alive. Hashtag the S-curve in natural movement. One of the most important visual rhythms in the human body is the S-curve. It appears naturally in posture. It appears in relaxed standing positions. It appears in walking and shifting weight. It appears in almost every human gesture. This S-curve is not just a shape. It is a reflection of balance between opposing forces. Compression and release. Tension and relaxation. Stability and movement. Artists study this curve because it reveals how the body organizes itself against gravity. Hashtag rhythm is the relationship between opposites. The human body is built on contrast. If one side is active, the other relaxes. If one part stretches, another compresses. If one direction moves upward, another responds downward. This creates rhythm, not uniformity, but balance between opposites. This is why figures feel dynamic even when still, because the body is always negotiating forces. Hashtag flow creates emotional quality. Rhythm is not only structural. It is emotional. A smooth flow creates calmness. A broken rhythm creates tension. A strong directional flow creates energy. A soft curved flow creates gentleness. Artists use rhythm not only to construct figures, but to shape feeling. Because the viewer does not just see rhythm, the viewer feels it. Hashtag the artist learns to follow energy, not outline. Beginners often trace the outline of the body, but experienced artists follow energy. They imagine invisible lines moving through the figure. Lines that guide the eye. Lines that connect forms. Lines that describe motion rather than boundary. These lines are not real, but they are felt, and they are essential for creating life in drawing. Hashtag rhythm exists even in stillness. One of the most important discoveries in figure study is that stillness is not absence of movement. Stillness is compressed rhythm. A seated figure contains tension held in balance. A standing figure contains micro-adjustments. A resting pose contains internal flow. Nothing is truly frozen. The appearance of stillness is only surface level. Underneath, rhythm continues. Hashtag visual rhythm is like breath. Artists often compare rhythm to breathing because it expands and contracts. It rises and falls. It flows and pauses. A figure drawing that has rhythm feels like it is breathing. It has life. It has presence. It has internal motion even on a static page. Without rhythm, a drawing feels mechanical. With rhythm, it feels alive. Hashtag why some drawings feel dead. A common question in art is, why do some drawings feel lifeless even when technically correct? The answer is simple. They lack rhythm. They may have accurate proportions. They may have detailed anatomy. But without flow, they feel disconnected. The body becomes a collection of parts rather than a living system. This is why rhythm is more important than precision. Hashtag rhythm guides the viewer's eye. In strong figure art, the viewer's eye does not move randomly. It follows a path, from head to shoulder, from shoulder to torso, from torso to leg, then back again. This visual journey is guided by rhythm. Artists design this movement intentionally. They control how the viewer experiences the figure, not through detail, but through flow. Hashtag the body as a river of movement. One way to understand rhythm is to imagine the body as a river. Energy flows through it, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with resistance, sometimes with sharp changes, but always moving. The artist's role is to capture this flow, not to freeze it, but to express it in visual form. Hashtag rhythm creates unity. Without rhythm, the body feels divided. With rhythm, everything becomes one. Head, torso, limbs, posture, all connected through movement. This unity is what makes a figure feel complete. Not perfect anatomy, not detailed rendering, but coherent flow. When rhythm is strong, even simple drawings feel powerful. Hashtag conclusion. The invisible music of the body. Rhythm is the hidden structure beneath all human movement. It is the invisible music of the body. It exists in posture. It exists in gesture. It exists in stillness. It exists in motion. Artists do not invent this rhythm. They observe it. They feel it. They translate it into visual form. And once they begin to see rhythm, the human figure is never the same again. Every body becomes a composition. Every movement becomes music. And every moment becomes a flow of life expressed in space. This is the second language of the silent body. Hashtag the silent language of figure drawing. Hashtag episode 3, stillness as expression. When people think of expression in the human body, they usually think of movement, gesture, action, energy in motion. But artists know something that seems almost contradictory. Stillness can speak just as loudly as movement, sometimes even louder, because stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is meaning held in suspension. Hashtag stillness is not absence. To the untrained eye, a still figure may appear inactive. Nothing is happening. No gesture, no motion, no visible change. But artists do not see absence. They see containment. They see pressure held in balance. They see emotion paused in time. Stillness is not the lack of movement. It is movement compressed into silence. Hashtag the body never truly stops. Even when a person is perfectly still, the body continues working. Breathing expands and contracts the chest. Muscles maintain balance. Micro adjustments keep the body upright. Gravity constantly influences posture. So even stillness is alive, is simply quieter, more controlled, more inward. Artists learn to observe this hidden activity beneath stillness. Hashtag stillness creates emotional focus. When movement stops, attention deepens. The viewer is no longer distracted by action. Instead, they begin to notice presence, weight, posture, tension, emotion. Stillness removes noise, and what remains becomes more powerful. A seated figure can feel more emotional than a dynamic pose, because nothing interrupts the feeling. Hashtag the psychology of stillness. Stillness often reflects inner states. A calm stillness may suggest peace or acceptance. A tense stillness may suggest anticipation or conflict. A heavy stillness may suggest emotional weight or fatigue. A controlled stillness may suggest discipline or restraint. Artists learn to read these subtle differences because stillness is never neutral. It always carries intention. Hashtag stillness and emotional pressure. One of the most important discoveries in figure art is that stillness often contains pressure, not physical pressure alone, but emotional pressure. A figure may appear composed on the outside, but internally, something may be building. Tension in the shoulders, tightness in the hands, a rigid posture, a held breath. Stillness becomes a container for emotion, and the longer it is held, the more intense it can feel. Hashtag the power of the pause. In music, Silence is part of rhythm. In figure art, stillness is part of expression. A pause creates meaning. It gives weight to what came before, and it prepares what comes after. Without pauses, everything feels continuous and flat. With pauses, emotion becomes structured. Stillness gives rhythm its depth. Hashtag stillness reveals structure more clearly. When the body is still, structure becomes visible. Alignment, balance, proportion, weight distribution. These elements become easier to read. Artists often use stillness to understand form more deeply. Because movement can hide structure, but stillness reveals it. It strips away distraction and exposes the underlying design of the body. Hashtag stillness can feel more honest than movement. Movement can sometimes be performed. People can exaggerate motion. They can perform gestures. They can express outward energy. But stillness is harder to fake because it exposes how a person naturally holds themselves, how they balance weight, how they rest, how they exist when nothing is happening. Artists often find truth in stillness because it reveals what remains when performance disappears. Hashtag the emotional depth of holding still. Holding still requires energy. It requires control. It requires awareness of the body. This creates a subtle emotional depth. A figure holding a pose is not passive. It is actively maintaining presence. This can create tension, discipline, or calm strength. Even silence becomes active. Even stillness becomes expressive effort. Hashtag stillness as reflection. Stillness often suggests internal reflection. A figure may appear paused in thought, disconnected from external action, focused inward. Artists often use stillness to suggest contemplation because thought itself is invisible, but stillness gives it form. The body becomes a vessel for inner life. Hashtag contrast. Movement versus stillness. Movement shows change. Stillness shows presence. Movement tells us what is happening. Stillness tells us what is being held. Together, they form a complete language. But stillness has a unique power because it isolates meaning. It removes distraction. It allows emotion to settle and be felt more deeply. Hashtag the artist challenge. Drawing nothing happening. One of the most difficult tasks in figure drawing is capturing stillness without making it feel empty. A drawing must feel alive even when the subject is motionless. This requires attention to subtle weight shifts, micro tension in muscles, balance between forms, emotional atmosphere, internal rhythm. Without these, stillness becomes flat. With them, stillness becomes powerful. Hashtag stillness as emotional magnification. In many cases, stillness amplifies emotion. A quiet figure can feel more intense than an active one because nothing distracts from the feeling. The viewer has space to absorb it, to interpret it, to feel it fully. Stillness becomes a magnifier of emotional presence. Hashtag why artists value quiet moments. Artists often prefer moments of stillness in life drawing sessions, not because they are easier, but because they are more revealing. Stillness allows time for observation, time for understanding, time for deeper perception. In stillness, the figure becomes more readable, more expressive, more human. Hashtag conclusion, the language of silence. Stillness is not the opposite of expression. It is another form of expression, a quieter one, a deeper one, a more concentrated one. It is emotion held in balance, life held in pause, meaning held in form. Artists learn to see stillness not as emptiness, but as presence. And once they understand this, every motionless figure becomes rich with meaning. Because even when the body is still, life continues speaking, just in a different voice. This is the third language of the silent body, the silent language of figure drawing. Episode 4, Body Communication in Space. When artists study the human figure deeply, they eventually realize something important. The body does not exist alone. It exists in space. And space is not empty. Space is part of the conversation. The figure is never just a shape. It is a presence interacting with the environment around it. Hashtag the body always occupies space. Even in stillness, the human body changes space. It takes up volume. It casts presence. It creates direction. It establishes boundaries between itself and the world. Artists learn to see the figure not as isolated form, but as something embedded in space. The body and space are not separate. They define each other. Hashtag space shapes meaning. A figure placed in an open space feels different from a figure placed in a confined space. The same body can feel free or restricted depending on its environment. Space changes interpretation. A seated figure in a large, empty area may feel isolated. The same figure in a crowded environment may feel compressed or overwhelmed. Artists use this relationship to guide emotional meaning. Because space is never neutral. It always influences perception. Hashtag negative space is not empty. One of the most important discoveries in figure drawing is the value of negative space. Negative space is the area around the body, between limbs, between posture and environment, between figure and boundary. To beginners, it may seem empty, but to artists, it is structure. It defines shape. It clarifies proportion. It supports balance. Without negative space, the figure loses clarity. Hashtag the dialogue between figure and environment. The human body is always in conversation with its surroundings. A leaning figure responds to gravity and support. A seated figure adapts to the surface beneath it. A standing figure adjusts to balance within space. This is not passive. It is active negotiation. The body continuously adapts to space, and space responds by framing the body. Artists observe this silent dialogue carefully. Hashtag direction creates meaning. Every figure has direction, even when still. The head may tilt forward. The torso may lean sideways. The limbs may extend or contract. These directions guide the viewer's eye. They create flow through the composition. They establish visual movement even in stillness. Direction is how the body communicates intention in space. Hashtag proximity changes emotional reading. How close a figure is to boundaries changes emotional interpretation. A figure near the edge of space can feel tension or urgency. A figure centered in space can feel stability or calm. A figure pushed into a corner can feel restriction or vulnerability. Artists use placement as emotional language. Because position is never random. It always influences meaning. Hashtag the body creates its own space. The human figure does not just exist in space. It creates space around itself. Through posture, through gesture, through extension, through compression. A stretched arm expands presence. A closed posture reduces spatial footprint. The body reshapes how space is perceived. Artists learn to see this expansion and contraction as part of expression. Hashtag space and emotional atmosphere. Space is not only physical, it is emotional. Open space can feel peaceful or lonely. Dense space can feel intense or energetic. Empty space can feel quiet or unsettling. Filled space can feel active or overwhelming. Artists use spatial emotion to support narrative and mood, because environment shapes feeling as much as form does. Hashtag the invisible frame around the body. Even without borders or lines, the human body creates a mental frame. The viewer subconsciously senses limits around the figure. This invisible frame guides perception. It defines balance. It affects tension. It shapes composition. Artists are aware of this unseen structure and use it intentionally. They place figures within imagined spatial boundaries to control how the viewer experiences the image. Hashtag movement through space. The body is never static in space. Even still figures imply movement. A forward lean suggests direction. A lifted arm suggests motion through air. A shifted weight suggests transition. Space becomes the medium through which movement exists. Artists capture not just position, but potential movement. Hashtag the figure as part of a larger world. No figure exists in isolation. Even a single figure implies context. A room, a landscape, a conceptual space. The body always belongs somewhere. Artists consider this relationship when constructing meaning, because a figure without space feels incomplete. It loses context. It loses grounding. It loses narrative depth. Hashtag space as emotional distance. Space also represents emotional distance. A figure surrounded by space may feel introspective. A figure pressed into space may feel emotional intensity. Distance between viewer and figure affects connection. Close framing feels intimate. Wide framing feels observational or reflective. Artists use spatial distance to shape emotional experience. Hashtag conclusion. The silent partner in figure drawing. Space is the silent partner of a human body. It does not speak in form, but it speaks through relationship, through distance, through direction, through absence and presence. Artists do not separate figure from space. They see them as one system, a shared language, a shared composition, a shared experience. To understand the human figure fully is to understand how it exists within space. Because the body is never alone. It is always in conversation with the world around it. And in that conversation, meaning is created. This is the fourth language of the silent body, the silent language of figure drawing. Episode 5, Visual Storytelling Without Faces. When people think about storytelling in art, they often think about faces, eyes, mouth, expression, emotion shown through facial detail. But artists know something more profound. A face is not required for storytelling. The body alone can tell the entire story. Without words, without facial expression, without explanation. Hashtag the body is a narrative system. Every human body carries a story. Not a written story, but a visual one. A story made of posture, gesture, balance, movement, and stillness. These elements combine to form meaning. Even without a face, the body communicates who a person is in this moment, what they are feeling, what state they are in, what energy they carry. Hashtag faces can explain, bodies reveal. Faces often clarify emotion, but bodies reveal deeper truth. A face can be controlled. A smile can be performed. An expression can be hidden or adjusted. But the body is more difficult to disguise. It shows tension. It shows fatigue. It shows openness or withdrawal. It shows how a person exists in space. Artists rely on this honesty. Hashtag storytelling begins in posture. Before any action is understood, posture sets the scene. A forward lean suggests intention. A closed posture suggests withdrawal. A stretched posture suggests openness. A compressed posture suggests emotional weight. Without any movement, posture already tells a story. It establishes context before detail appears. Hashtag gesture creates plot. If posture is the setting, gesture is the action. Gesture introduces direction. It introduces change. It introduces intention. A raised arm is not just a shape. It is a decision. A turned torso is not just anatomy. It is a shift in attention. Gesture moves the story forward without words. Hashtag the body suggests before it explains. In visual storytelling, suggestion is more powerful than explanation. The viewer does not need everything spelled out. They interpret. They feel. They complete the meaning internally. A partially hidden gesture can feel more powerful than a fully revealed one, because imagination becomes part of the story. Hashtag silhouette tells the core story. Even without detail, the silhouette of the body carries meaning. A tall, upright silhouette suggests strength or alertness. A curved silhouette suggests softness or introspection. A sharp, angular silhouette suggests tension or energy. Artists often test compositions in silhouette first, because if the story works in silhouette, it works at every level. Hashtag body language is universal narrative. Unlike written language, Body storytelling does not require translation. Every human being understands it instinctively. We recognize tension in shoulders, relaxation in posture, fear in contraction, confidence in openness, sadness in collapse, energy in expansion. These are not learned concepts. They are human perception. Hashtag space becomes part of the story. The environment around the figure adds narrative context. A figure surrounded by emptiness feels isolated. A figure surrounded by density feels embedded or overwhelmed. A figure positioned near edges feels tension or transition. The body and space together create story structure. Neither exists alone in narrative meaning. Hashtag stillness as narrative pause. Stillness is not absence of story. It is a pause in story, a moment where something has already happened, or something is about to happen. The viewer senses before and after. Stillness becomes a narrative bridge. It gives time for emotional interpretation. Hashtag multiple figures, multiple stories. When more than one figure appears, storytelling becomes relational. Distance between figures becomes emotional meaning. Orientation becomes communication. Shared space becomes interaction. Even without movement, relationships form narrative tension. Two bodies facing away from each other tell a different story than two bodies leaning inward. No words are needed. Hashtag the viewer completes the story. One of the most important truths in visual storytelling is that meaning is not fully contained in the image. The viewer completes it. The viewer interprets posture. The viewer fills emotional gaps. The viewer connects experience to form. This makes body storytelling deeply personal. Each viewer sees slightly different emotional narratives based on their own perception. Hashtag why faces are not enough. Faces provide detail, but detail is not the same as depth. A face alone cannot show full body tension. It cannot show weight distribution. It cannot show how a person exists in space. It cannot show how energy moves through the body. Without the body, the story is incomplete. Hashtag the body as cinema without words. Figure drawing can be compared to silent cinema. No dialogue, no spoken explanation. Only movement, framing, and expression. The body becomes the actor. Space becomes the stage. Gesture becomes dialogue. And stillness becomes silence with meaning. Hashtag conclusion. The body tells everything. Visual storytelling does not depend on faces. It depends on awareness. Awareness of posture. Awareness of gesture. Awareness of movement and stillness. Awareness of space and relationship. When artists understand this, they no longer need facial expression to tell a story. The entire body becomes expressive language. Every position becomes narrative. Every movement becomes meaning. Every silence becomes tension. And every figure becomes a complete story without a single word spoken. This is the fifth language of the silent body, and it is where the language becomes complete. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 6, The Final Insight, Seeing the Human Body as Living Meaning. As we reach the final episode of this series, something important becomes clear. Each layer we explored was not separate. Gesture, rhythm, stillness, space, story. They are not isolated ideas. They are one system, one continuous language. And the human body is where that language becomes visible. Hashtag the body is not an object, it is an event. Most people look at the human figure as something fixed. A shape, a structure, a form to be observed. But artists see something different. They see an ongoing event. The body is always becoming, always adjusting, always responding. Even in stillness, something is happening. Breath, balance, energy, presence. The body is not a thing. It is a process. Hashtag everything we have learned connects. Gesture is the beginning of movement. Rhythm is the flow of movement. Stillness is compressed movement. Space is where movement exists. Story is how movement is interpreted. None of these can stand alone. Each one depends on the others. Together, they form a complete system of seeing. Hashtag the artist does not copy. The artist translates. A common misunderstanding about figure drawing is that it is imitation. But true observation is not copying. It is translation. The artist translates. Asterisk physical weight into visual balance. Asterisk movement into rhythm. Asterisk emotion into posture. Asterisk presence into form. Asterisk life into image. This is not mechanical reproduction. It is interpretation of living meaning. Hashtag seeing is a form of understanding life. When artists study the human body deeply, something changes in perception. They no longer see people as static appearances. They see behavior. They see tension and release. They see emotional structure. They see how life expresses itself physically. The human figure becomes a mirror of existence. Not just anatomy, but experience. Hashtag the body holds time inside it. One of the deepest insights in figure study is that the body contains time. Not just the present moment, but traces of past movement and suggestions of future movement. A posture is never isolated. It is part of a sequence, a moment in a longer flow of life. This is why even a still image feels alive, because it contains implied time. Hashtag nothing in the body is neutral. There is no completely neutral position. Every posture has meaning. Every gesture has direction. Every stillness has weight. Even rest is expressive. Even silence has structure. Even absence carries presence. Artists learn to see that nothing in the human body is empty of meaning. Hashtag the human figure is a complete language. When all layers are combined, the human body becomes a full language system. It has grammar, structure, and proportion, vocabulary, gesture, and posture, rhythm, flow, and timing, punctuation, stillness, and pause, context, space, and environment, narrative, emotional interpretation. This language does not require translation. It is understood instantly by human perception. Hashtag why this way of seeing matters beyond art. Although this series focuses on figure drawing, the way of seeing extends beyond art. It changes how we observe people in daily life. It increases awareness of emotion. It deepens empathy. It sharpens attention to subtle human behavior. It teaches us that communication is not only spoken, it is embodied. Every person is constantly expressing something, even in silence. Hashtag the final shift from looking to seeing. There is a difference between looking and seeing. Looking is passive. Seeing is active. Looking observes surface. Seeing understands structure. Looking notices appearance. Seeing perceives meaning. Artists train themselves to move from looking to seeing. And once that shift happens, perception changes permanently. The world becomes more detailed, more expressive, more alive. Hashtag the human body as living meaning. At the deepest level, the human figure is not just visual. It is meaningful. It carries information about emotion, about intention, about experience, about presence. Every movement is communication. Every stillness is expression. Every posture is a statement about being alive. Artists do not simply observe this. They listen to it with their eyes. Hashtag conclusion. The silent language is already speaking. Across this entire series, we have explored one idea from many angles, that the human body is a silent language, not metaphorically, but literally in perception. It speaks through gesture. It sings through rhythm. It pauses in stillness. It expands in space. It tells stories without faces, and it expresses life without words. Artists do not create this language. They discover it. They refine their ability to read it. And through that process, they come closer to understanding what it means to be human. Because the body is always speaking. The only question is whether we have learned how to see it. This is the final insight, and the beginning of a deeper way of seeing the world. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 7. The origin of seeing. Why the human body becomes art. Before all language, before all drawing, before all interpretation, there is only perception, And perception is where everything begins. In this final expansion of the series, we step back from technique, structure, and analysis. And we ask a deeper question. Why does the human body become art in the first place? Hashtag, seeing comes before drawing. Many people believe art begins with the hand, with pencil, with brush, with technique. But in truth, art begins much earlier. It begins in the act of seeing. Long before the artist draws anything, they have already made countless decisions in perception. What to notice, what to ignore, what to emphasize, what to understand. Drawing is only the final translation of a much deeper process. Hashtag, the body is the first mirror of life. The human body is the most immediate reflection of existence. It is where life becomes visible. Emotion becomes visible. Intention becomes visible. Because of this, the body naturally becomes the center of artistic attention. It is not chosen randomly. It is recognized as something already meaningful. Hashtag, why the human form feels familiar yet infinite. The human body is both known and unknown. We see it every day. We live inside one, yet we never fully finish understanding it. This creates a unique tension. Familiarity on the surface, infinite complexity underneath. Artists are drawn to this tension because it never becomes boring. It never becomes complete. It always offers something new. Hashtag, the moment of recognition. At some point in artistic perception, something shifts. The body is no longer just anatomy. It becomes presence, a living system of meaning. The artist no longer asks, "What is this?" They begin to ask, "What is this doing?" This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now, observation becomes interpretation, and interpretation becomes expression. Hashtag, the human body as a constant becoming. Nothing about the body is fixed. Not posture, not emotion, not movement, not identity. Everything is in a state of becoming. Even stillness is a form of becoming. A pause between states. A transition held in time. Artists see this continuous transformation, and that is what they try to capture. Not a static moment, but a living process. Hashtag, why the body becomes symbolic without intention. Even without symbolic intent, the human body becomes symbolic. A bowed head suggests emotion. An open stance suggests confidence. A curved spine suggests internal reflection. A raised arm suggests action or resistance. These meanings are not invented. They are perceived. They arise naturally from human observation. This is why the body becomes a universal artistic subject, because it already communicates. Hashtag art is the translation of perception. At its core, art is not about creation from nothing. It is translation, from perception into form, from experience into image, from observation into meaning. The human body becomes the medium through which this translation is most clearly visible, because it already contains structure, emotion, movement, and narrative. Hashtag the artist does not add meaning. They reveal it. One of the deepest truths in figure drawing is this. Meaning is not added to the body. It is revealed within it. The artist does not invent emotion. They notice it. They refine it. They bring it into clarity. What was already present becomes visible. This is why great figure art feels truthful, because it is not imposed. It is discovered. Hashtag seeing as a form of attention. To see like an artist is not a skill alone. It is a form of attention, a way of being present with what is in front of you. Not rushing, not assuming, not labeling too quickly, but observing relationships, patterns, tensions, flows. This quality of attention transforms ordinary perception into artistic awareness. Hashtag the body as endless interpretation. There is no final interpretation of a human body. Every viewing reveals something new. Every angle changes meaning. Every context shifts perception. Even the same figure seen twice can feel different, because the observer has changed, or the moment has changed, or the understanding has deepened. The body remains open to interpretation forever. Hashtag why artists return again and again. This is why artists never stop studying the human figure. Not because they lack mastery, but because the subject is inexhaustible. It does not end. It expands with perception. The more you see, the more there is to see. The more you understand, the more complexity appears. This is not limitation. It is richness. Hashtag final reflection. Seeing as the first creative act. Before brush touches canvas. Before pencil touches paper. Before form becomes visible. There's a moment of seeing. That moment is the true beginning of art. Everything else follows it. Gesture, rhythm, stillness, space, story, all emerge from this origin, from the simple act of noticing. Deeply, carefully, humanly. Hashtag conclusion. The body that never stops speaking. The human body is not silent. It is always communicating, always expressing, always becoming. Artists do not create this language. They enter it. They learn it. They translate it into form. And through that process, they discover something essential. To see the human body clearly is to see life itself in motion, not as concept, but as presence. And in that presence, art begins. This is the origin of seeing, and the beginning of all artistic understanding. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 8. The memory inside the human body. When artists observe the human figure deeply, they begin to notice something that is not immediately visible. The body does not only exist in the present moment. It carries traces of the past, not in words, not in stories told aloud, but in posture, tension, and movement. The body remembers. Hashtag the body keeps what the mind forgets. A person may forget an experience, but the body often does not. Emotional moments leave subtle imprints in how a person holds themselves, in how they stand, in how they sit, in how they respond to space and pressure. Artists begin to see these traces not as biography, but as form. Memory becomes visible through structure. Hashtag posture as accumulated experience. Posture is not random. It is shaped over time, by habits, by emotions, by physical and psychological experiences. A slightly closed chest may suggest long-term protection. A forward-leaning stance may suggest engagement with life. A guarded posture may suggest repeated caution. These are not judgments. They are observations of accumulated physical history. Hashtag tension is a record of emotion. Muscle tension is not only physical. It is emotional memory expressed in the body. Shoulders may hold stress. Hands may hold hesitation. Neck alignment may reflect emotional readiness or withdrawal. Even stillness can contain stored intensity. Artists learn to read this silent record carefully because it reveals what words cannot. Hashtag the body remembers movement patterns. Every person develops movement habits. The way they walk, the way they sit, the way they shift weight, the way they pause. These patterns become familiar, and they remain consistent over time. To an artist, these patterns are signatures, not written, but embodied. Hashtag memory in stillness. Even when the body is still, memory is present. Stillness does not erase history. It contains it. A still figure may hold years of experience in a single posture. Relaxation shaped by repetition. Tension shaped by habit. Balance shaped by adaptation. Stillness becomes a snapshot of long-term physical memory. Hashtag the invisible layer of personal history. What artists see is not only what is visible. They also sense an invisible layer. The accumulation of lived experience expressed through form, not as narrative detail, but as physical presence. This is why two figures in the same pose never feel identical, because their internal histories are different, and those histories shape their bodies. Hashtag the body as a living archive. The human body functions like an archive. It stores emotional responses, habitual movements, physical adaptations, learned postures, unconscious behaviors. None of these are actively displayed, but all of them influence how the body appears. Artists begin to see the figure as a record rather than a snapshot. Hashtag time is written into form. Time is not only measured in clocks, it is also written into the body. A lifetime of movement shapes alignment. A lifetime of emotion shapes expression. A lifetime of behavior shapes posture. The body becomes a timeline made visible, not linear, but layered. Hashtag why artists feel depth in human presence. Sometimes, a figure feels deeper than its surface suggests. This depth is not illusion. It is perception of accumulated experience. Even without knowing a person's history, artists sense the weight of time within the body. This creates emotional richness in observation. A single posture can feel like a story without details. Hashtag the present moment contains the past. Every present posture is influenced by past experience. Nothing begins fresh. Everything continues. The body in this moment is shaped by every moment before it. Artists learn to see this continuity. The present is never isolated. It is always connected to what came before. Hashtag the subtle language of habit. Habits are one of the clearest expressions of bodily memory. They appear in repeated gestures, consistent posture tendencies, unconscious adjustments, resting positions. These habits form a personal rhythm, a physical identity, a silent pattern of being. Hashtag why this changes artistic seeing. Once artists begin to notice bodily memory, observation deepens. The figure is no longer just form. It becomes time expressed physically. It becomes experience made visible. It becomes presence shaped by history. This transforms drawing into something more reflective, more human, more layered. Hashtag conclusion. The body that never forgets. The human body is not only a structure in space. It is a record of time, a living archive of movement, emotion, and experience. Artists do not see this directly. They sense it through posture, tension, and gesture. And once this awareness develops, the figure becomes more than a subject. It becomes a history in motion, a memory in form, a silent testimony of life lived. This is the eighth language of the silent body, and it reveals that nothing the body experiences is ever fully lost. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 9. The emotional weight of the body. When artists observe the human figure deeply, they begin to notice something that cannot be measured. The body does not only carry structure, it carries emotional weight, not physical weight alone, but the invisible weight of feeling, memory, and inner experience. This weight is not seen directly. It is felt through posture, balance, and presence. Hashtag emotion does not stay in the mind alone. Emotion is often thought of as something internal, something happening in thought, in memory, in awareness. But emotion does not remain inside the mind. It moves into the body. It shapes posture. It influences tension. It changes how a person occupies space. Artists learn to see emotion as something embodied, not abstract. Hashtag the body as emotional architecture. Every human body is structured not only by anatomy, but by emotional adaptation. Shoulders carry accumulated stress. The spine reflects long-term balance between confidence and caution. The chest reflects openness or protection. The hands reflect tension or release. These are not symbolic interpretations. They are observable patterns of expression through form. Hashtag weight is not only physical. A figure may appear light in form, but feel heavy in presence. Another may appear solid, but feel emotionally lifted. This is because weight in figure drawing is not only physical gravity. It is emotional gravity, a sense of internal pressure that affects how the body is held. Artists often describe this as presence weight, something that cannot be drawn directly, but must be felt. Hashtag emotional compression and expansion. The body constantly shifts between two states, compression and expansion. Compression appears as inward movement, Folded posture. Reduced spatial presence. Protected form. Expansion appears as outward movement. Open posture. Extended limbs. Greater spatial presence. These shifts are emotional expressions made physical. Hashtag the center of gravity as emotional center. The body's physical center of gravity often reflects emotional state. A stable, grounded center can suggest calmness or confidence. A shifted or unstable center can suggest tension or uncertainty. Artists observe how weight is distributed through the figure. Because weight distribution reveals emotional grounding, not just physical balance. Hashtag tension as emotional holding. Tension in the body is not random. It is holding emotion, holding intention, holding restraint, holding reaction. A clenched hand may hold frustration. A tight jaw may hold control. A rigid posture may hold discipline or fear. These expressions are not exaggerated. They're subtle, and they're constant. Hashtag the quiet language of breathing. Breathing is one of the most invisible emotional indicators in the body. Slow breathing suggests calmness or reflection. Shallow breathing suggests tension or alertness. Held breath suggests anticipation or emotional pause. Even though breath is not seen directly, it influences posture and rhythm. Artists sense breathing through subtle movement changes in the torso and shoulders. Hashtag emotional layers within stillness. Even in complete stillness, emotional weight continues to exist. Stillness does not remove feeling. It contains it. A still figure may feel heavy with thought, or light with calm presence, or tense with internal pressure. Stillness becomes a container for emotion that is not expressed outwardly. Hashtag why some figures feel heavy in art. Sometimes a drawing feels emotionally heavy even if the composition is simple. This happens when emotional weight is strong in the posture, not because of detail, but because of internal structure. The viewer senses * downward pull, * internal compression, * reduced openness, * emotional density. This creates a feeling of gravity beyond physical form. Hashtag emotional balance in the figure. Just as the body maintains physical balance, it also maintains emotional balance. A figure may show tension in one area and release in another. This creates equilibrium. Emotion is rarely one-dimensional. It is distributed across the body. Artists observe this distribution carefully, because imbalance creates narrative tension. Hashtag the body as emotional memory in motion. Emotional weight is not only present moment feeling, it is also memory. Repeated emotional experiences shape physical expression over time. This creates habitual posture, habitual tensión, habitual openness or closure. The body becomes a living record of emotional history in motion. Hashtag why emotional weight cannot be drawn directly. Artists cannot draw emotion itself. They draw its effects. They translate emotion into * posture, * gesture, * rhythm, * balance, * spatial presence. This is why emotional drawing is indirect. It is not illustration of feeling. It is interpretation of physical expression. Hashtag the viewer feels before they understand. One of the most powerful aspects of figure art is that emotional weight is felt immediately. Before analysis, before interpretation, before explanation, the viewer senses presence, then gradually understands why they feel it. This is the power of embodied emotion. It communicates directly through perception. Hashtag conclusion. The invisible gravity of human presence. The human body is not only a physical structure in space. It is also a carrier of emotional weight. This weight is invisible, but constantly present. It shapes posture. It influences movement. It defines stillness. Artists learn to perceive this invisible gravity not as concept, but as lived experience in form. And once this awareness develops, every human figure becomes more than anatomy. It becomes presence shaped by feeling, a silent expression of inner life made visible through the body. This is the ninth language of the silent body, and it reveals that emotion is always physically present, even when it is not spoken. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 10. The final silence, when the body becomes pure presence. At the end of all observation, all analysis, all interpretation, there is something that remains. Something that cannot be broken down further. Something that cannot be simplified. Something that cannot be explained in parts. Presence. Hashtag beyond form, beyond meaning. In the beginning of this series, we looked at gesture, then rhythm, then stillness, then space, then narrative, then memory, then emotional weight. Each layer added depth. Each layer revealed something new. But at a certain point, all layers dissolve into one experience. The direct perception of presence. Not what the body means, but that the body is. Hashtag the body before interpretation. Before the mind labels what it sees, there's a moment of pure observation. No clasification, no judgment, no analysis, only awareness of form and space. This is the raw state of seeing. Artists often return to this state after all training, because it is the foundation beneath technique. Hashtag presence cannot be reduced. Presence is not anatomy, not gesture, not emotion, not story. It is not something added to the figure. It is something already there. It emerges when all distractions fall away, when the observer is fully attentive, and the subject is fully present. Hashtag the silence between observer and subject. At the deepest level of figure drawing, something subtle happens. The distance between artist and subject becomes quiet. There is no longer separation of I am looking and it is being seen. There is only shared space of awareness, a silent exchange, without language, without intention, only perception meeting presence. Hashtag when technique disappears. Technique is necessary. Gesture, rhythm, structure, and composition are essential tools. But in advanced seeing, technique becomes invisible, not forgotten, but integrated. The artist no longer thinks in steps. They simply see and respond. This is where control transforms into intuition. Hashtag the human body as pure existence. At this level of perception, the human figure is no longer interpreted as symbol or story. It becomes existence in visible form. Breathing existence, balancing existence, standing existence, moving existence. The body is no longer about something. It simply is, and that is enough. Hashtag the still point of seeing. There's a moment in deep observation where everything slows. Not physically, but perceptually. The mind stops rushing ahead. The eye stops searching for meaning. The figure becomes complete in itself. Nothing is missing. Nothing is added. There is only what is present. Hashtag why artists return to silence. Despite all complexity in art, many artists return to simplicity. Not because they reject knowledge, but because they seek clarity. In silence, perception becomes sharper. In silence, detail becomes unnecessary. In silence, the essential becomes visible. Silence is not absence of content. It is removal of noise. Hashtag presence is the end of comparison. At early stages, artists compare. Good or bad, correct or incorrect, accurate or inaccurate. But in deeper seeing, comparison disappears. There is only observation. Each figure is complete in its own state, not measured against another, not judged against an ideal, just perceived as it is. Hashtag the body does not try to be understood. One of the most important realizations is this. The human body is not performing for understanding. It is not aimed to be decoded. It simply exists. Meaning is not its intention. Meaning is our perception. This shift removes pressure from interpretation and allows clearer seeing. Hashtag when drawing becomes listening. At this stage, drawing is no longer about control. It becomes listening with the eyes. The hand follows what is seen, not what is imagined, not what is expected, but what is directly present. This creates a quiet alignment between perception and action. Hashtag the final shift from seeing the body to being with it. In early learning, the body is an object to observe. Later, it becomes a system to understand. Eventually, it becomes presence to experience. This is the final shift, not distance, but proximity of awareness. The figure is no longer out there. It is simply there, and so is the observer. Hashtag conclusion. The silent language completes itself. Across this entire series, we explored the silent language of the human body. Gesture as emotion, rhythm as flow, stillness as meaning, space as relationship, story as structure, memory as form, emotional weight as presence, and finally, presence itself. At the end, all distinctions dissolve. What remains is awareness of life expressed through form. The human body is not only something to be drawn, it is something to be witnessed. And in that witnessing, the artist does not only see the figure. The artist sees life, moment by moment, as it becomes visible. This is the final silence, and the beginning of true seeing. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 11. After the silence, returning to the world with new eyes. After silence, something always returns. Not noise, not confusion, but the world, seen differently. Because once the human body has been observed deeply as a language, perception does not go back to what it was before. Nothing looks the same again. Hashtag the world becomes figurative. After studying the human figure, the mind begins to notice structure everywhere. In walking people, in standing posture at bus stops, in the way someone leans while thinking, in the tension of a shoulder during conversation. The world becomes filled with silent figures. Not staged, not artistic, but naturally expressive. Life itself begins to appear composed. Hashtag you stop seeing people and start seeing states. At first, we see people as identities, names, roles, faces, but deeper observation changes this. We begin to see states of being, alertness, fatigue, confidence, hesitation, relaxation, tension. These states are not spoken. They are embodied, and they are visible to train perception. Hashtag ordinary moments become visually rich. A person waiting, a person walking, a person sitting quietly. These simple moments begin to feel rich with visual meaning. Not because they have changed, but because attention has changed. The same world becomes more detailed, more expressive, more alive. Nothing is added. Only perception deepens. Hashtag the body speaks, even in everyday life. Outside the studio, the silent language continues, but is no longer studied with pencil or brush. It is simply observed. A tilt of the head during listening, a shift in weight while standing, a pause before responding. These are no longer unnoticed details. They become readable expressions. The world becomes legible. Hashtag awareness without judgment. One of the most important changes in perception is this. Observation becomes non-judgmental. The body is no longer seen as correct or incorrect, strong or weak, beautiful or imperfect. It is simply seen as expression in motion. This removes pressure from perception and replaces it with clarity. Hashtag the quiet respect for form. Deeper seeing creates respect, not admiration in a dramatic sense, but quiet respect for how complex human presence is. How much is communicated without words? How much is held in posture? How much is expressed without intention? The body becomes something carefully observed, not consumed. Hashtag seeing without interfering. At a certain point, observation becomes so refined that it no longer interferes. The mind stops trying to fix what it sees, stops trying to categorize too quickly, stops forcing interpretation. Instead, it allows the image to exist fully before response. This creates a cleaner, more honest perception of reality. Hashtag the studio and the world become the same practice. What is learned in figure drawing does not stay in the studio. It continues outside. The same attention used for gesture drawing becomes attention for daily life. The same sensitivity to rhythm becomes sensitivity to human movement in crowds. The same awareness of space becomes awareness of environment. Art and life stop feeling separate. They become one continuous act of seeing. Hashtag the loss of invisibility. Before this awareness, most human expression is invisible, not because it is hidden, but because it is not noticed. After this awareness, invisibility disappears. Everything becomes slightly more visible, not overwhelming, just clearer, more defined, more present. Hashtag a new kind of listening. This way of seeing is also a way of listening, not with ears, but with attention. The body of another person becomes something understood in silence, without interruption, without assumption, without need for explanation, just observation of presence in motion. Hashtag the responsibility of seeing. With deeper perception comes quiet responsibility, because once you can see more, you also understand more. Not everything needs to be interpreted. Not everything needs to be spoken about. Some things are simply witnessed and held respectfully in awareness. Hashtag returning to simplicity. After exploring complexity, perception returns to simplicity. A person standing, a person walking, a person resting. But now, these simple things are not empty. They are full of meaning that does not need articulation, full of presence that does not need explanation, full of life that does not need interpretation to exist. Hashtag conclusion. The world after the silent language. After learning the silent language of figure drawing, nothing in the world becomes louder. Instead, everything becomes clearer. The body is no longer just anatomy. It is expression. Space is no longer empty. It is relationship. Stillness is no longer absence. It is presence. And life is no longer something to observe occasionally. It becomes something constantly readable. This is what remains after the silence. Not technique, not theory, but a way of seeing that does not turn off. A way of perceiving the human body and the world as continuous meaning in motion. And once this way of seeing begins, it does not end. It simply becomes how the world is seen. The silent language of figure drawing. Episode 12. Final conclusion. What remains after all seeing? At the end of every long observation, there is a natural return. Not to confusion, not to complexity, but to simplicity, to what was always there, before analysis, before interpretation, before language. Hashtag everything began with seeing. This entire journey began with a simple act, looking at the human body. But as attention deepened, that simple act unfolded into many layers. Gesture, rhythm, stillness, space, story, memory, emotion, presence. Each layer revealed something essential, but none of them existed alone. They were always part of one continuous experience. Seeing. Hashtag the body was never separate from meaning. One of the deepest realizations in this journey is this. The human body does not need meaning added to it. It already carries meaning in its form, in its balance, in its movement, in its silence. Artists do not invent this meaning. They discover it through attention. Hashtag understanding was never about control. At first, it may seem that figure drawing is about control. Control of proportion, control of structure, control of accuracy. But deeper understanding reveals something else. It is not control. It is awareness. The ability to see clearly what is already present, without forcing it, without correcting it into something else. Hashtag the body is a living language, not a fixed object. Across all episodes, one truth remained constant. The human body is not static. It is not an object frozen in time. It is a living language, always shifting, always responding, always expressing something even in stillness. Hashtag there is no final image. One of the most important realizations is this. There is no final version of seeing, no perfect drawing, no complete interpretation, no ultimate understanding. Each moment of observation is temporary. Each perception is partial. And yet, each is complete in itself. Hashtag the artist does not finish seeing. A drawing can be finished. A painting can be completed. But seeing does not finish. It continues. It evolves. It deepens. The more one sees, the more seeing becomes a way of being. Not a task, not a skill, but a constant awareness. Hashtag what remains after all concepts dissolve. After gesture, rhythm, stillness, space, and story are understood. After memory, emotion, and presence are recognized. After all analysis quiets, something remains. Direct perception, the simple awareness of life and form. The recognition that something is present without needing explanation. Hashtag the human body as pure presence. At its deepest level, the human figure is not a subject to be analyzed. It is presence, breathing presence, moving presence, still presence, human presence made visible. This is what artists ultimately return to, not complexity, but immediacy. Hashtag the end of the system is the beginning of seeing. This series explored a system of understanding, how artists read the human body. But the final truth is not a system. It is a shift in perception, from thinking about seeing to simply seeing, from analysis to awareness, from structure to presence. Hashtag closing reflection. The silent language of figure drawing was never only about art. It was about attention, about how deeply something can be seen, about how much meaning exists in simple form, and about how the human body without speaking can express everything necessary to understand life in motion. Hashtag final conclusion. In the end, nothing new is added. Only clarity remains. The body is still the body, but now it is seen differently, not as object, but as expression, not as shape, but as meaning, not as image, but as living presence. And in that recognition, the silent language completes itself not as information, but as awareness. And what remains is very simple. The act of seeing and the life that is seen. This is the end of the series and the beginning of a quieter way of looking at the world.